There's an entire workshop in the text I just sent you guys about predictions, and the ego reward of being right is the single most powerful biological force. Nothing else is even close. So you need to know that. Be of the herd, but not in the herd. Yet be of the herd, you have to know how the herd is wired and what they are going to reliably do when they're surprised. They're going to run. It's what they do. Which way? I don't know. You get a large enough herd, and there's something running in every direction. So you just got to pick your optimum place to perform your skill. You get a large enough herd, something's going to run into that trap. Problem solved. Be of the herd, but not in the herd. So you must be able to adopt the disinterested mindset that separates you from the ego and the being right or not. That's what I mean by the science project, and just collecting data. That is the single biggest edge you could possibly ever have until such time as human nature changes. That's the limit of that. That's the limit of that edge. As soon as people stop being people, and guess what? If you're using statistics to adapt to how the people are changing, you cannot possibly be out of connection with the herd, because the statistics describe the state of the herd now and forever. As long as we're herd animals and our nature might be changing slowly, statistics will keep you on the herd. Follow the herd. Be of the herd, but not in the herd. Dudes, that is a 20-hour weekend intensive workshop just to beat that into your head. Don't make me do it. I mean, seriously. That's why you got to listen to Huberman from Stanford on the dopamine and oxytocin cycle of hormones. Because the species is wired. I just got to say this. Just pardon me for talking, but the species is wired so that you have millions of little experiments all the time. The world is hard. Coming up with new ideas is hard. So DNA works by having millions of little experimenters who are reliably wrong, because they're trying this little thing and it's, that wasn't it. And you just learn to be resilient and keep going until you're dead. But if you ever predicted and got it right, the potential payoff of that, genetically speaking, is uncalculable. That could have been the fact that changes the entire pecking order of species and who's going to become the new apex predator. That's how powerful a new piece of information is. DNA doesn't even try to predict how valuable it is. It just says, holy smokes, we got something new. Absolute reward. Keep doing that and disseminate it through your little tribal communication system so we don't lose the tribal knowledge. That's the economic or the evolutionary advantage of our weak species, is that we are so socially constructed to be of the herd and in the herd and social acceptance, but driven by the ego to try to be right because the reward is so great that you never even remember all of the ones that you were wrong because you got a taste of being right. That's why people who are ever successful through luck early in their trading career are doomed to be traders for their entire life, because the persistent memory of that one moment will multiply. In fact, the longer the space between your big wins, the more powerful the memory of those things become and drives you even further. In fact, the more frequently you win, the less it means to you because you're just used to that. And then the novelty of losing gets your attention. It's like, oh, that's why guys like champions find it so hard to maintain. But if they lose, they come back like raging maniacs because they've discovered the connection to that primal spirit that drove them to be the champion in the first place. That's why they never want to quit, because each loss helps them rediscover that inner fire, which is what actually drives them. They want to be warmed by their own heat from the inside. That's why a loss is so powerful and why they find it so hard to quit and walk out on top. They can't do it because we're of that species. So the persistent edge consists of understanding that with your rational mind, but establishing procedures and processes that allow you to not be trapped to that flypaper, to be able to treat the trade as just one in a long series of making bricks. So you got to have good raw material. You got to frame your workspace safely with power tools. You got to follow procedures. I'm going to use improper language. Make a goddamn brick. One brick. Just make a brick. Then stack the brick on the pallet correctly. Then move the pallet to the work site. Then make some structure with bricks that withstands weather and the wolf. It allows you to store the grain that the gatherers and farmers are working so hard in the fields for. If you got to make a wall to protect them against the wolf, so be it. That's what you got bricks for. So your brain is a prediction machine. So what your brain does, and that's why you listen to Huberman, every 1.8 seconds, your brain is making an updated prediction about what's happening next in the world. There's too much data to be open to all of it directly. The brain establishes mental models and feelings and emotions as a buffer against that continuous stream of information. And what it does is it creates a mental model of the world based on what it thinks is going to happen, and then it checks for exceptions. So your entire visual cortex is wired to detect movement against a static display. Your eyes are drawn to my moving finger because that's your visual cortex. Your eyes are drawn to my green shirt because it is different than the muddy background. And so your visual cortex drives your entire brain processing to understand the world. The very first thing that primitive optical systems do is detect shadow, the difference between light and dark. Because in the world, a shadow is danger. Because something just moved between you and the light source that wasn't there, and chances are, if it's moving towards you, it's coming to eat you. So your first reaction is fear and to move, the startle reflex. If you get startled and it startles you with a lion's roar, I've ever been in the zoo and listened to one of those bad boys when you're not expecting it. Holy mackerel. Freeze, kill. So the sensory overload, that's a 10 sigma event when you get surprised by a lion's roar. So the point is, what you said was very important about understanding the statistical definition of normal versus abnormal. 100% of the sniper's frame of reference is being able to distinguish between normal and abnormal, and then doing standard work in the normal space, and then standard work in the abnormal space. That's it. So understand your visual cortex to find the distinction and learn to look broadly with unfocused vision in order to detect the movements and then stalk and establish the net and the boundaries and localize it until you're ready to strike. That's how a predator thinks. That's how a hunter thinks. And you got to remember that all those little motions could just be bait for the thing that is stalking you. You just keep those things in mind, and you will have 100% understanding of the important elements of biology and brain neurology in the way the herd thinks. Absolutely essential. 100% of the secret of success is understanding those ideas right there. And then being able to put that wedge between you and that herd animal brain. The herd animal has fear of getting away, and then it has overjoyed when it thinks it got away. Hooray, I got away. And then they run into the next ambush, and they are really shocked. You only got about 3 bursts of adrenaline in you before you are done. We know that in combat. How many times can you surge? 3 times a day. And then you are worthless. So you got to monitor your people's emotional and chemical states because they may be done. And you got to be able to recognize that in them and in yourself and in the price structure that tells you when those guys are done. That's what we would mean by capitulation at one end of the abnormal price action and elation. Hey, guess what emotions are found at those kinds of extreme moves? Is it capitulation or elation? It's both of them, because somebody is just in despair and capitulated. There's another guy that is absolutely elated and is not in the proper mental state to be able to frame the trade. So at the end of extraordinary moves that terminate in a range compression, that's the 100% of the secret of the max pain range compression. Because the max pain, you saw most of the herd is in absolute utter despair, and it is compressed to suddenly a small little doji. That is the biggest shift in market psychology that you could ever possibly see. You went from a moment of absolute red Niagara and disaster to the tiniest little doji of indifference and absolute parity between buyers and sellers. Are you kidding me? You put an MMRB around that, you're set for life. That pattern alone, 100% set for life. That's one of the ways of operationalizing a compound critical state. But I'll tell you, if the max pain in that time frame is so extraordinary, you don't even need a compound critical state. The fact that it's a doji tells you that new buyers and sellers came in to change the entire psychology that was contained in that time frame that created the maximum pain. The very fact that there is a doji instantly tells you that all of the previous assumptions are off, and that run is done, and now it's in play. Now, I don't know who came in and caused it to stabilize. I don't know how big they are, but they were big enough to stop that run. Are they big enough to run it all the way back up, or are they going to capitulate when the sellers come in with new ammunition? And it doesn't matter. I don't care which way it goes. I have found a compound critical state in the max pain range compression. It takes one slide to teach that idea. One slide and 10 minutes. I just did it. Don't ever forget that lesson. If you forget everything else, don't forget that lesson. How is your brain constructed, and how do you preserve that edge? It's the ability to place a buffer between your decision making and your craftsmanship and all of the embedded emotion of the herd in that compound critical state. That is the power of the no lose plus dinner for 2. When you recognize that and feel the enormous release of satisfaction and just, whew, I'm not dead now, I'm not dead yet, instantly shift into craftsman mode. Now go. You got to know that you just avoided an absolute disaster by getting to no lose plus dinner for two, because you took all of the negative consequences off the table for that trade forever. That's how important that is. And then from there, if you can then go from the state of absolute elation that I didn't get killed, that sense of existential relief, you know how good that feels? I hope you never have to feel that. But being in a position where you should have been killed and you didn't, man, is that any good? Okay, so what? Now, frame it and go. Be a pro. If you can do that, and then put that disinterested science project on there, hand that off to the manager, and then if it gets really good, add the sniper, done in one. Nothing else I ever will say is going to be better than that unless I come up with something better. But man, oh man, do you have to listen to that message 100,000 times. Because that is the emotional content of the 2-hour battle drill, which is the mindset of the craftsman as he's framing that. But the emotional content is what I just said, connected to your evolutionary brain. Don't you ever forget that.